Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. It is FPC Radio Live, and we had a little bit of a hiatus yesterday because I don't know, I was affected by the AT&T problem. You know, we couldn't communicate. John and I, when we do this show, you know, John comes over the phone. You know, I don't want to. My ego is so big. I do not want his stunning good looks to take away from my persona on the air, so I have him over the phone. So unfortunately, we couldn't do the show yesterday. I heard it was solar flares or system upgrade or the aliens. I think are coming to get us, John. One of those three is probably the reason why we all lost communication.
I got to push back on the solar flares. Like they only attacked the parts that would affect AT&T. Like they didn't affect
well,
T-Mobile or Verizon.
Clearly
or
AT&T is the best provider out there, John. Duh.
I've heard that. I know Verizon's really good. I have T-Mobile, which can be spotty where I am. It's not the best, but you know, Captain Zeta-Jones was doing the pitch for it, 10 years ago when I switched to T-Mobile, and that was the reason I went with T-Mobile because of Captain Zeta-Jones. I'm obviously very shallow.
No, hey, look, it's a good enough reason for me. I mean, they're all the same to me. I don't really care. I mean, we all have iPhones. They're the same phone. It doesn't do us any difference, you know. I just happen to have been with AT&T for a while, but yeah, you know, the funny thing is you know, there's I like all the foreign language, like different like documentaries and stuff on Netflix, or not documentaries but shows, just in general, just because, you know, it's a different perspective. It's a different, you know, they're not all, you know, the same act. Anyways, there's a series out there. I think it's Turkish, maybe. It might be Turkish. I'm not sure, but the whole concept of it is there was a solar flares from the sun. There was some issue with the sun, and it you know, sent these flares to Earth, and like basically people, if you were, you know, when the sun came up, everyone that was there died unless you were like undersea or, you know, deep down underground or something like that. So, you know, I was thinking that, I was like, well, you know, I've watched these shows, so we're pretty much screwed if that's the case. That was real.
Yeah, you got to build that underground bunker. You know, be like Tim Thomas, so he can go below the Earth's surface and last forever.
Oh, hey, you know, you never know. Maybe I might do that, but no, but anyways, I was thinking about that because, well, that's what my mind does. But anyways, that's why we were not on the air yesterday. But it's okay because, you know, look, the football season's over. It's not, you know, news isn't as dire or as urgent rather yet. You know, we're getting close to free agency, March 11th. That things will start to heat up. But I real quick, because I do want to talk about some of these potential movement of some of these quarterbacks. You know, Justin Fields, Mac Jones. I and this is kind of expected, but I want to get your opinion on it, John, because I think we're kind of getting to the I don't even know if jump the shark is even appropriate at this stage. I think we're far past that when it comes to some of the conversation surrounding Patrick Mahomes, because, you know, clearly I'm going to public enemy number one, I guess, when it comes to the you know, Mahomes propaganda train, and that's Nick Wright. But, you know, these comparisons are getting a little out of hand because lately it's talking about him being the second closest to Wayne Gretzky in American sports, and he's had the best start among any player in any sport ever, yada, 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 on. And these are real talking points that I just can't wrap my mind around because I told you, John, before we got on the air, I'm trying so hard. And for anyone out there listening, I am. I really am. I'm trying to be just like down the center. I don't want to be this, you know, grumpy old guy who's just like, no, these guys were better. But I think people are getting so comfortable with just ignoring anything that didn't happen within the last like 4 or 5 years that it's getting to a point where I can't even entertain that type of conversation with anyone who seriously thinks that Patrick Mahomes is the second coming of Wayne Gretzky or the closest thing to Wayne Gretzky or like the greatest across all of I mean, the talking points are just, they're making my mind explode. So, John, I know you're a historian, which is pretty much key word for an old guy. So I think we're on the same page here, right? I mean, there's a there's a way we can appreciate how great Patrick Mahomes has been, and he has been great. I'm not saying he hasn't, but I feel like we've just gone so far over the top at this point. It's almost comical, and it's like I can't have discussions with a lot of fans because there's no middle ground when you think like that, and then when you base your opinion on reality.
Right, because when you push back, you all of a sudden are branded a Patrick Mahomes hater, which
Right.
we're not. I think Patrick Mahomes is fantastic. After beating the 49ers in the Super Bowl, I said he's the third greatest quarterback of the Super Bowl era, behind only Tom Brady and Joe Montana. That's incredible when you think about it. He's only played 6 seasons. That's an incredible accomplishment. But to start comparing someone to Wayne Gretzky, who the first iteration of Wayne Gretzky is the all-time leading scorer in terms of goals. The second iteration of Wayne Gretzky is he's also the all-time leading assist leader, and he has more assists than anyone else has points. Like, I mean, talk about lapping the field, and we talked about it before the show. There's about 4 athletes that I'd say just kind of lap the field in terms of statistical dominance. Gretzky in hockey, Will Chamberlain in basketball, Babe Ruth in baseball, and I'd say Jim Brown in football because he led the league in rushing 8 out of 9 years. Now, Brady has the total stats of yards and touchdown passes and wins and Super Bowls, all of that. But for the most part, not in a given year was he just like twice as dominant as the next guy. I mean, when Babe Ruth hit 61 home runs, 60 home runs, no other team had hit 60 home runs. You know, Will Chamberlain was averaging 50 points per game and 25 rebounds. Those numbers are just like, what? What are those numbers?
Wayne Gretzky won the Hart Trophy, which is the MVP trophy, the first 8 years of his existence in the NHL.
Right.
Yeah, you know, and across that time, I think it was 7 of those 8 years, he led the league in assists. 5 or 6 of those years, he led the league in goals. And that was just those first 8 years. And like, you know, people keep going on and on about, Mahomes he has no peers. And I'm like, again, I roll my eyes because I'm like, I look across the landscape. I'm like, well, 2 other players have won 2 MVPs during his time, which, you know, again, is unlike what Gretzky did. Gretzky clearly just lapped the field, like you said. And I agree with you how you know, those 4 players kind of stand above in terms of just like utter dominance. And then even again, you look across, you know, these 6 years, he's led the league once in touchdowns, John, once. That's it. And twice in yards. And then again, if you really want to get into it, guys, and this is where I sit there and you know, I told you this before we got on the air. This is where I'm at a bit of a crossroads here. Do I choose to go down the route of superhero villain and just kind of commit to the hate? And I don't mean hate as in terms of hating the player because he's great, but hating because, you know, again, the opposite is just so over the top, I just can't take it anymore. Or do I go down a path of just utter insanity? I don't know, John. I don't know which one is better. Either way, if this continues, if we start hearing more and more about these Wayne Gretzky and Tiger Woods comparisons, then yeah, maybe I might go off to the right and just go down that superhero villain route because, like, look, if you're going to prop up these numbers, which again, we're not saying that they're a product of necessarily the era, but they're certainly boosted by it. And to not recognize that is what drives me nuts. Because then on top of that, John, not only do you have the added advantage of playing in a far more open NFL when it comes to passing, but I hate to say it, but you're really propping up those numbers with a lot of things that some of these other quarterbacks didn't do. I mean, for years, Tom Brady was called a dink and dunk quarterback, John. Well, have you seen his numbers compared to what Patrick Mahomes has done? We talk about Patrick Mahomes lapping the field. Well, this is where he's lapping the field, John. Short yardage, yards after the catch, impact by yards after the catch. Not just raw yard numbers. Like a couple of years ago, Patrick Mahomes was 1 and Tom Brady was 3rd. Well, Tom Brady, I think, only had 39% of his passing yards after the catch, whereas Mahomes had, I think it was 56 or 57. So the total amount wasn't necessarily a big difference, but the percentages were. And this is a pattern, John. There's data to back it up. I mean, no one's thrown more short yardage behind the line of scrimmage touchdown passes. No one gets more yards after the catch. No one gets more, Chiefs fans love EPA. No one gets more EPA from passes before the line of scrimmage. And you're trying to tell me that this guy is Wayne Gretzky or the second coming of Wayne Gretzky or the closest thing to Wayne Gretzky. It's driving me nuts, John. And Joel says commit to the supervillain route. And I might have to do that.
I don't know if that'll be healthy for you, but give it a try. See what
happens.
Well,
my idea of supervillain is Jim Carrey as the Riddler. So
I got you. Okay, that's good. Go with that then. Yeah,
a lot of costumes.
That's true too. He was a well-dressed man. The thing that I would look at too is that there's a couple other athletes, and you brought up Tiger Woods, who was just like so much better than everyone else for a 5-6 year period. Like the difference between him and the second best golfer was the same difference as the second best golfer and like the 20th best golfer. And we saw that with Barry Bonds for about a 5-6 year period too. And I'll put Michael Jordan in there, who won 10 straight scoring titles, all the while being one of the top 3 defensive players in the league. Like, that's utter dominance, right? So, and he won 5 MVPs during the regular season. So there's a bunch of guys that were clearly dominant. And now Mahomes is becoming that, but not statistically the way Gretzky or Chamberlain or Ruth or any of these other great athletes we're talking about. It's difficult to do that in football. I mean, the equivalent in football would be he comes out and throws 68 touchdown passes and 6,000 yards. That's not going to happen.
No.
He's going to average 4 touchdown passes per game and, nearly 400 yards per game. No, that's not playing in the Big 12. So that's where I have to push back some on this because, and again, we declared him as the 3rd greatest quarterback of the Super Bowl era after 6 years. That's unheard of. And that's not good enough for people.
Yeah, apparently not. And that's the issue. And that's why we can't have good conversations. Like, I've been, I've mended some fences with a few Chiefs fans that I've interacted with. Good. Look, a lot of this stuff is emotional. We get whenever you're discussing something you're passionate about, it's not just me about Brady. It's more historical. And look, I mean, I've been like that with a lot of different topics when it comes to sports. I try my best not to get over the top in the moment. You know what I mean? I try to look at it with some perspective. And I feel like that perspective is just being lost now. And to the point where it's not necessarily a simple lack of knowledge, which look, we just yesterday was the quick math. Oh God. 20 plus 20, 44 year anniversary of the Miracle on Ice. I wasn't alive for that, John. But I understand the significance and I appreciate the impact that it had and how big of a moment that was, not only for, obviously hockey, the sport, but, United States in general. I understand that you can't live through everything, John. These sports leagues have a long history. There's a lot of fans. And again, there's a lot of adult fans that only knew Tom Brady in the NFL. I saw the NFL before Tom Brady was around. I'm clearly seeing it now after the fact. So, I understand that there's some, you got to kind of go a little bit extra sometimes to figure this out. And I feel like people just aren't doing that because, again, to come to a lot of these conclusions, it's really just about dismissing, well, at this point, Brady, Montana, and some of these other great quarterbacks, which, again, that cheapens the conversation. And really, I do think it's disrespectful.
Well, so many people live in the moment, right? So Matthew Slater announces his retirement earlier in the week, and people are like, well, he should be a Hall of Famer. I'm like, based on what?
Right.
Like, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. And the Hall of Fame announcement came out just before the Super Bowl, and Patriot fans were up in arms that Rodney Harrison didn't get inducted.
Well,
and I'm like,
I'll say this because it gives me a great opportunity to kind of promote something here that we just did yesterday. But I'd say Matthew Slater's a Hall of Famer if some of the long list of other special teamer guys get in first. Because I have no problem if you want to honor Matthew Slater for what he did and how he played the position. But, we actually just recorded an interview. It's going to come out today with Hank Bauer. My second favorite Bauer now, behind Jack Bauer.
Yep.
Jack Bauer's number one. He's the Wayne Gretzky of specifically Bauer's, but in terms of superheroes that I'd put him up there. But great conversation with him, talking about guys like Steve Tasker and plenty of other great special teamers of the past, including him, who, again, this is something you're never going to probably see again. 52 special teams tackles in one season.
That's amazing. That's like
and
3.5 per game.
Right. And to put it in perspective, over the course of Matthew Slater's great career, he averaged probably 12 or 13 a season.
Right.
So, and this is not to again, I have no problem if you want to put Matthew Slater in the Hall of Fame for a lot of reasons that maybe don't even directly relate to football, just the person and the person in the league and his impact in the league. But you have to do it with some of these other guys first.
Yeah, Steve Tasker is the first one that comes to mind. I believe he was selected for 7 Pro Bowls. Matthew Slater, 10 Pro Bowls. I mean, it's a specific position. I mean, they've never put a pinch runner into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Give them time, they may do that and screw up the Hall of Fame even more so than it's already screwed up. But I'm even going to go back to Rodney Harrison. You can't even have a conversation with like Patriot fans. They're like, he got robbed for not being inducted in the Hall of Fame. I'm like, okay, you do realize that on the ballot this year, there was another safety who actually accomplished more, who also didn't get in. Darren Woodson.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
so Darren Woodson had more Pro Bowls, more All-Pros, and one more Super Bowl. So, like, have that discussion. Like, why didn't he get in as well? Like, generally you don't pick 2 safeties in the same year.
The problem, though, is, John, and look, I agree with you, but at the same time, both fan bases have a point. But the issue is the backlog and players for the Hall of Fame. And this is something, again, this is a discussion we can, go, for hours about. But, I always start it, and it kind of usually ends with this. The Hall of Fame wasn't even an establishment until the 60s.
Right.
And there's a long history of NFL football before that. So just right off the bat, you're already behind, and we're getting close to a point where, like, we're in an era of highlights and consuming football in a far different way than we used to, that a lot of the appreciation for players of the past, certainly because, look, numbers have ballooned in the modern NFL. And it's hard to reconcile that sometimes with some of these players that don't have the flashy numbers, but are clearly Hall of Fame worthy and Hall of Fame great. It's like the classic example is again, there's reasons for it, but let's say Chiefs fans knocking John Elway. Well, I'm not surprised. They're his rival, but I even think even if you hate him as a division rival, you can appreciate how great he was as a player. But in some cases, they're like, oh, he wasn't even that good. Look at his numbers. Well, it was a different game, John. It was a different game.
Sure was, yeah.
So
yeah, and look, I think you run into this in all sports. Even like, okay, here's the issue that happens, and I think the Pro Football Hall of Fame does the best job of anyone. Basketball puts way too many people in. I think baseball puts in people that don't deserve to be there, and they leave out people.
Well, that's a baseball writers voters problem. I think that's the most egocentric group of people on the face of this planet is the Baseball Hall of Fame writers. So yeah.
They feel like they invented the sport. They're not open to new ideas.
Oh, it's awful.
Especially the older voters. But in terms of Pro Football Hall of Fame, okay, so you basically get 5 modern era players every year. But you're talking about an incredible talent pool, right? You've got 22 starters on a football team, specialists, etc. So the talent pool is huge, and you're trying to pare it down to 5 players. Basketball, which lets too many people in, also selects like 5 modern era players, and the talent pool is nowhere near as big as football. You have 5 starters and a few guys off the bench. It's like 1/3 the size of a football roster, but you're putting in just as many modern era players. So Basketball Hall of Fame, the finalists came out last week. You got Vince Carter, Chauncey Billups, and Michael Cooper are probably all going to get in. You can certainly make a case that none of those guys are Hall of Famers, but they're probably going to get in because it's a weak year and you have to induct someone into it. Baseball does get one thing right. Some years they don't have anyone to put in, and that to me makes sense. But again, now you talk.
Well, football, like I said,
like that, and it's different.
Yeah,
there's enough players in football that deserve it,
and there's enough backlog that you can put in a new class of players for decades. Just even ignoring like the past 20 years. So and that's the thing. I mean, John, this past class is probably the most prominent when it comes to looking at the 21st century NFL. all the players that got in played predominantly in the 21st century. And, I think that's kind of where we're going right now because, well, guess who's coming up in a few years? Guys like Tom Brady. You got guys like Adam Vinatieri who, based on the push to appreciate some more special teamers, he's probably going to get in. Yeah, I was going to say Joel brings up the WWE Hall of Fame might be the most ridiculous thing ever because I don't even, I mean, there's some really great things about it, but at the same time, it does kind of feel like almost like just a little bit of comedy at times, but that's beside the point.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
look, it is. I get, great point. It's entertainment. So good for you. That's a great point. That kind of puts things in perspective.
And Rob Gronkowski is going to get in a year before Brady because he retired a year earlier than Brady. And the amazing thing about the 5 players that were selected for the Pro Football Hall of Fame this time around, I believe they're all younger than Tom Brady.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken,
yeah.
And several of them much younger. But it's the way it works in that sport, and it's good. And it's just got so many different positions. And should a kick returner be in the Hall of Fame? Ray Guy is a punter is in the Hall of Fame. I believe there's only 3 full-time kickers.
Look, if it's a position,
Anderson, and if it's a position, then I guess they qualify, right?
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that. I don't care. I don't care if all you do is return kicks. If you did it at such a high level, then you deserve to be recognized. If that's how I think the majority of people feel. So I have no problem with that. And I think unfortunately positions and groups get kind of pushed to the side. I mean, talk about right tackles, John. I mean, talk about a position that's just so underappreciated because, well, the left tackle is the glamour spot because most quarterbacks are right-handed, and
right.
That doesn't mean that there aren't great players at that position. Talk
exactly,
to Willie Anderson.
Yeah. I mean, yep, Willie Anderson, Lane Johnson, maybe with the Eagles. I mean, he's still playing. He's played at a high level. Maybe that discussion will happen 5 years after he retires. For sure, there's not a lot of safeties in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Like I said, Vinatieri will become the 3rd kicker to make it, and I think he's pretty much a lock to make it because he kicked the biggest kicks in NFL history, made the biggest kicks in NFL history. So, yeah, it's interesting in that sense because you have to fill that backlog of players that didn't quite get in. I mean, Jerry Kramer was the one Packer that didn't get in until just about 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm like, let's put this guy in before he passes. He was considered, I believe, on the 50th anniversary team as one of the 2 starting guards,
right?
Which would lead you to believe that he's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, you would
but
think.
Somehow he just kind of slipped through the cracks, right? So look, nothing's going to be perfect for sure, but I think the Pro Football Hall of Fame does a really good job, and it's a tough job because the talent pool is just so enormous.
Well, I certainly think they probably take it more seriously. Like I said, I have, and this isn't unfortunately, it's a blanket statement. I'm sure there are people within the group that do take it seriously, but I think in general, the Baseball Hall of Fame is kind of a joke. I mean, the agendas are just, I mean, out in the open are so, it kills it for me, and it drives me nuts. So yeah, I agree with you.
8 people didn't vote for Willie Mays in his first year of the first year he was on the ballot. Like, what were they thinking?
Right.
Willie Mays. Like, if that guy's in a Hall of Famer, then shut the thing down.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, look, I say what you want about steroids or whatever, but I mean, I know you and I agree that Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame. You know what I mean?
Roger Clemens.
And Roger Clemens, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, hate them all you want. I get it, but like, yeah, it's just, to me, it's. I've always said, and I've said it for years, if you put them all in that deserve it, not just don't put them in just to put them in, but put them in if they deserve it. And if you got a scarlet letter them, go for it.
Tell the story.
Tell the story. But
right,
appreciate
exactly.
what they did, because what they did is reality. You can't just ignore it, as hard as you try. I mean, I know Yankees fans tried so hard to ignore the home run record a few years ago. Remember that? It's like, oh, this is the real home run record. It's like, no, it's not.
No, it was only the American League home run record. Give Aaron Judge credit for that, but no, there's another fellow that owns that record. I mean, in terms of the Pro Football Hall of Fame too, where are you on assistant coaches making it? Like, say, a few years down the road, Dante Scarnecchia comes up for discussion.
Look, again, if it was a prominent role within a football organization, then yeah, I have no problem with any of that because again, we talk about how much of a team sport football is. Well, why does only certain aspects of that team get recognized, consistently within the Hall of Fame? Well, yeah, I mean, but that's the thing, John. If you're an assistant coach, though, you have to do something above and beyond because you are working at a disadvantage because you don't have as much of an impact as a head coach who, again, controls everything. Whereas you can point to Dante Scarnecchia, his length of time in the NFL and the success that came with it, and sit there and say, wow, this guy was one of the best, if not the best, offensive line coaches of all time. How is that not Hall of Fame worthy?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I
mean, I think it's an interesting discussion. Like Dick LeBeau's in the Hall of Fame, and I'm not clear if he's in because of being a great defensive coordinator, but he's also a great defensive back. I think he's in for that reason. He was top 5 or top 10 in interceptions.
And it's the Steelers.
Well, yeah, the Steelers
I mean, that helps. That's a little bit of a boost.
They do, and I know they have 10 players from the 70s Steelers that are in there. The thing is, and again, Patriot fans always attack the Steelers for that. And say, well, they've got 10 in, and the Patriots may only have 6. Well, first of all, they won 4 in 6 years.
And it was before free agency, Right,
it was the same team. Those 10 guys all won 4 Super Bowls. And Donnie Shell, not sure if he should be in the Hall of Fame. Lynn Swan's in the Hall of Fame partly because of incredible Super Bowl performances, but at that point, do you have to put Julian Edelman in because he was also MVP of a Super Bowl? I say no, but maybe that's going to be the discussion with Julian Edelman, who I don't think belongs in the Hall. But if I was, and I say, well, Lynn Swan was a Super Bowl MVP, as was Hines Ward, another wide receiver, was a Super Bowl MVP, who's a borderline Hall of Famer. So maybe that puts them over the top. Lynn Swan was a great receiver, and again, it was a different time. They weren't throwing the ball 40 times per game, so his numbers are going to never measure up to any wide receiver today. I mean, the 20th leading receiver this year had more receptions than Lynn Swan ever had in a season. It's a different time.
Yeah, and again, I mean, as much as obviously, like I said, this isn't never really meant to be like a knock, but just to put it into some sort of context or perspective that. Yeah, I mean, you're just the league is with these rules and how it's officiated. Like it's more open. Like you wouldn't dream of throwing the ball. And Brady talked about this, and he was kind of at the tail end of that old era. So it's like this era existed long before Tom Brady came around, where it's like you're not thinking twice about throwing a ball carelessly in the middle of the field because you're going to get your quarterback, your wide receiver killed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's how the game was played. So, of course you can't just, again, run around and wait for someone to break open and just huck the ball across the field, because more often than not, that player is getting absolutely wrecked because there was no rules against that. There were no rules against, certainly if you go back to like the late 70s, there was no rules against basically assaulting the wide receiver all the way down the field. You could hit.
I honestly don't. No, that's a great point. And I remember, I'm damn old enough. I was 15 at the time when Darryl Stingley was hit by Jack Tatum and paralyzed back in August of 1978. I don't recall if a flag was thrown on that play. I don't recall. I mean, I might have to go on YouTube and see if that was the case. I honestly don't remember. I mean, I remember Joe Turkey Jones, who picked up Terry Bradshaw like after the whistle and dumped him on his head. I think he just got a 15-yard penalty, but he wasn't even thrown out of the game. And that's when I say, well, how can we compare Terry Bradshaw's stats to Patrick Mahomes? Well, if someone did that to Patrick Mahomes today, they'd be thrown out of the league. There'd be an investigation. It just wouldn't happen.
Right.
It just wouldn't happen. So that's a different time. And I bring this a lot to basketball. Like I'm just waiting for Nick Wright, who I like because I think he's good at what he does because he stirs the pot. But one of his favorite players right now, besides LeBron, is Luka Doncic, who's averaging 34 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists per game. Michael Jordan's career average was 30.6 rebounds, 6 assists. Does anyone think Luka Doncic is 4 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists better than Michael Jordan? Does anybody think that? Like, if they do, they're insane. They should be institutionalized. It's just the numbers are bigger in basketball now because the 3-point shot, pace of play, You got a bunch of guys averaging 30 points. You got a ton averaging 25 points per game. It's a completely different sport than it was even 20, 25 years ago.
Right. And that's why in a lot of these cases that, it's especially when you're trying to compare players to the all-time, not just all-time greats in general, but the all-time great in whatever sport. That's why I sit there and I push back and say it's at this point it's not even an appropriate conversation. And then they'll flash up all first 6 years. Well, guess what? At the end of the day, when you're looking at each player's career in totality, no one's going to care how they're not going to sit there and say, wow, these guys are pretty close. How were their first 6 seasons? Like,
Right.
no one's going to say that. No one cares. It's just that's the argumentative point because, John, what's the difference? Okay, so it's the first 6 seasons versus, okay, Tom Brady's first 4 seasons, he won 3 Super Bowls. So what's the start? That's my favorite thing. Like, oh,
Right.
he has the greatest start. Well, how long is a start, John? Because I can sit there and say, well, Tom Brady's start was better in his first season. I think that's a start. His first 4 seasons were, in terms of championship wise, certainly better. But like I said, we go back to we talked about this a little bit the other day, or at least I think I did. And maybe this is all in my head, but we were talking about Super Bowl 38 in particular and how it gets portrayed now. When in reality, I can sit there and very confidently say that performance in the Super Bowl was better than any of Patrick Mahomes' 4 so far. And going back to the original discussion when we were talking about, him being the next best thing to Wayne Gretzky in that game, John, and this is the most remarkable thing. Tom Brady threw for I think it was 354 yards. Only 96 of those were yards after the catch. That's crazy. And if you watch the highlights, yeah, you'll see why, because it was a lot of tight window throws. It was a lot of pinpoint type accuracy. You make the right decision every single time. And every time you look at like Mahomes' stat line, it's like 55, 60% yards after the catch. And it's like you watch the game and it's like, everyone's like, oh, this is my favorite thing, John, is cover 2, John, is brand new, cover 2. It's cover 2 has been around for a long time. Okay. Quarterbacks adjust to it. The defensive, and I don't even understand this term, but people are calling it, John, the defensive meta has changed because of Mahomes. What the absolute does that mean? Like, what are we doing? This is I'm getting worked up now. See, Joel, I think you're right. I think I am eventually just going to commit to the supervillain role because every time this gets me going, I can't stop because, again, it's all this hyperbole. It's all this over the topness when it's like, okay, let's sit back and just not completely dismiss players of, in this case, just a few years ago, let alone 50. And let's look at it and take it into account and let's stop this ridiculous over the topness because, again, like you and I have said, John, we can have a great conversation. We're sitting there. I said, and I'm not ranking him necessarily, but I'm saying like you can put him anywhere between 3 and 7, and I can understand an argument one way or the other. And I think that's a compliment. It should be,
Hell
right?
Yeah, for 6.
Yeah.
That's an incredible compliment. When's the last time anyone got into that discussion after 6 years? It wasn't Brady. It wasn't Montana. Nobody.
I don't think people put Brady that high. Well, again, part of it too is because the standard has changed drastically, John. Because there was no way Tom Brady should have. Because Peyton Manning was the guy, right? Remember?
Right.
We've talked about this. It's Peyton Manning was supposed to be the next thing, and that was one of the pushbacks about Tom Brady was because he wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to be Peyton Manning, the first family of football, John. Archie Manning's son, first overall pick. But no, it was Tom. And unfortunately, people have kept that narrative or that mindset about him for years that, oh, well, he was in a right situation because clearly he went 6 overall. He certainly wasn't the most talented or the most athletic or the most this or that, the other. And it's like, we've just watched for 20 some odd years him do the exact opposite of what you said he was. So why are we not just accepting that and putting it in that perspective? So when people sit here and say, oh, Patrick Mahomes is on another talent tier, I'm like, no, he's not. I don't care that he can run around. Like, I really don't. Like, it's good for him. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not, and we've talked about it. His legs are a great advantage for him. But I couldn't care less, John. I couldn't care less because to me, it's just a different style of playing the position. And unfortunately, people treat it as a better way of playing the position. And the ironic thing is, in a lot of cases, it's not.
Wayne Gretzky was far from being the fastest skater or
Yeah,
having the hardest
no.
shot, right? Well, far from that. I mean, to me, me with Mario Lemieux, I think he's the greatest player ever. Gretzky's accomplishments are ridiculous. I know you can't start putting up stats, although they both scored 2 points per game. And Lemieux was even a more prolific goal scorer throughout his career than Gretzky. Maybe not at his peak, but throughout his career, he was a more prolific goal scorer. I think Lemieux averaged 0.75 goals per game, and Gretzky averaged 0.6 goals per game. But I think they're the two greatest players ever. But Lemieux was bigger, stronger, had a stronger shot. I mean, the guy was massive out there. But you can make a case of Gretzky being the greatest player. Again, he wasn't the fastest skater or had the hardest shot. You know, I mean, Ovechkin has a better talent base if you want to go there. I mean, the guy's a freight train. But no one thinks Ovechkin's greater than Gretzky. That doesn't even come into discussion. Ovechkin is measured against who? Crosby.
Yeah,
right?
His contemporary.
Of their era. Right, he's contemporary. And now McDavid is going to join that conversation.
Right.
He may have a better skill set than those two guys. But yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily be. Tiger wasn't the longest driver of the ball. There are other guys that could outdrive him. He was the best golfer.
Yeah, and kind of like what we were talking about before. Because I push back at people saying, you know, when they say Mahomes is lapping his contemporaries, I'm like, first of all, there aren't that many, and it's not because of how great he is. It's just by virtue of situation. Like, he's just the older veteran now. I mean, obviously we know Aaron Rodgers, and you know, I'm not talking about the Russell Wilsons and Joe Flacco's of the world. Like no one ever talked about Andy Dalton with Tom Brady. And well, again, there actually were some idiots out there that basically said he was Andy Dalton. But again, we're ignoring those people for now. But the point is like, I'm actually talking about contemporaries, and there's very few at this point who have been in the league or have had as many games under their belt as he does. So yeah, of course his numbers are going to be better. But like, if you look at him and Josh Allen, they're almost statistically identical. And if you're going to sit there and tell me that what makes Patrick Mahomes so different is his physical abilities and his arm talent, quote unquote, and I disagree with the definition of arm talent because I think it's more than just running around and throwing the ball with different arm angles, then I can make an argument that Josh Allen is better if nothing else matters. Because I think he's more
physical talent, sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But I don't believe that. I don't think he's a better quarterback because, again, I don't believe that all this athleticism necessarily translates or means that you're a better player. It's just, it's flashier. And people, unfortunately, again, credit the wrong things, or at least they put too much emphasis on the wrong aspects of playing the position. Because, like I said, I couldn't care less. Like, I gotten a lot of pushback. I'll give you two guesses as to what fan base it was, but I'm guessing you'll probably only need one. When I said the other day that Tom Brady has elite mobility, and it would
be the Chiefs fan base.
Yes,
I would think.
Yes, yeah. The only people who push back at it, and again, this was a tweet. It was actually a highlight video of Super Bowl 38. And I just quote tweeted. I said, that's elite mobility, blah, blah, blah. I didn't mention a thing about Mahomes. Sure. And all they want to do is make it about Mahomes, which, again, that kind of speaks to their insecurities a little bit. But, you know. Hey.
Dan Marino had elite mobility within the pocket. Like, he was incredible at doing that. Doesn't mean Dan Marino was going to, win the 40-yard dash.
Right. So the pushback was, well, is he more mobile than Lamar Jackson and Michael Vick? I'm like, that's not. Mobility is not just running around outside the pocket. And then again, and this was the funniest part, was because they all dance around the subject. So he's like, well, no, he has elite pocket footwork and his sense of defenses and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, so all those things, moving in the pocket was what he did good. Oh, okay. So mobility, okay,
right.
footwork.
By definition, it is
exactly. And like, so, when I say that, I get pushback, and somehow, again, they twisted it into me taking a shot at Mahomes when I didn't even mention the guy. But the point is, people just value the wrong things, and they have a lot of people just have no grasp of what the quarterback position is, and it's unfortunate.
What makes Mahomes so great are a lot of his intangibles. And we
Yeah.
talked about that after the Super Bowl. Like we said, Josh Allen probably has a stronger arm. Mahomes a little more accurate. Josh Allen is a bulldozer when he decides to run. I mean, he's looking for unstoppable. He's the closest thing we've seen to Cam Newton as far as just being a physical presence. But Mahomes has incredible intangibles. He's smart. He is completely in control of his situation. He's calm in big moments. He's a tremendous leader. He's very, very competitive. Like, those are all the things we talked about Brady. I've said this a million times. Brady and Mahomes have a lot more similarities than people want to give them credit for. They're a lot more alike. I'm sure Brady watches the games and goes, and is more impressed with all of that stuff than, okay, he rolls right with the ball or whatever.
Exactly.
Because that's what makes quarterbacking great. So that, why can't they accept that? It doesn't have to be this, purely
in this Super Bowl should be a perfect example of it, John. I mean, four field goals from the field goal kicker. You had a special teams muff that set them up for their only regulation touchdown, and like, I'm looking at it, I'm saying, yeah, no, of course. Like, I don't care what you do in the first or second quarter. I don't care what you do against the Texans in the wild card round. Like, yeah, they came back from 20 points down or 24 points down. Well, guess what? They did that in a quarter. They had a lead at halftime. I don't care about that as a comeback. That's not a comeback to me, John. That's a bad team getting out front and blowing a lead like we all kind of expected them to do. That's why they lost by 20. I'm more impressed with what Patrick Mahomes did in the Super Bowl in the closing seconds because it wasn't his best day. And overall, you're going to look at it and say, well, again, I mean, the yardage marks are inflated, but I'm not impressed by that. I'm impressed at making the right decisions at the right time, most consistently. And outside of Brady, we haven't seen another player do that. That's the difference between Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. Because as great as Aaron Rodgers is, he's a better thrower of the football than Patrick Mahomes. He's more accurate. He has a better arm, but he's not a better quarterback.
No, because what happened, again, go back to the Super Bowl, the muff punt, what happened the next play, touchdown, Kansas City, he made them pay for their mistake.
Right.
Aaron Rodgers might have found a way to screw that up. And look, I'm Aaron Rodgers' biggest supporter.
I'm a big fan of Aaron Rodgers, but it's the reality of it, John.
Yeah, the reality is he would have screwed that thing up. I go back to the game-winning drive in the Super Bowl, down by 3. He throws a pass to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who turned a 7-yard gain into a 4-yard loss, all by himself. He did it all by himself. He lost 11 yards from where he caught the ball.
And then he goes right back to him.
Went right back to him. I mean, he was kind of pissed. You knew probably in the huddle he said, you got to be better than this, MVS, but I'm coming back to you. Aaron Rodgers would have never thrown him another pass the rest of the day or maybe ever. Like, that's the difference between those two quarterbacks. Those are intangibles, and Mahomes has phenomenal intangibles. Let's give him credit for that. That's why he's won 3 Super Bowls, not because
that's what I'm trying to do, John.
Lapping the field. We're complimenting the guy, and we both said I think he's the 3rd greatest quarterback in the Super Bowl era after 6 years.
Yeah,
and we're talking 55 years, 58 years of the Super Bowl.
Well,
era. And we're coming up on number 60 years. That's pretty good.
And like I said in a tweet, at some point, it's like, you can appreciate his greatness and all that and believe very strongly that he shouldn't be in a conversation with Tom Brady right now. Both things can be true, and that's where I stand, and that's where I think most people should stand, because again, we're not talking about, at least and I didn't believe this, and again, there's no proof of this because it wasn't, we didn't have this social media around at the time. Facebook had just launched. I was on Facebook in November of 2004 or whatever, but we didn't have the discussion that often in terms of getting on Twitter and just voicing our opinions. But, at the same time, I didn't believe Tom Brady was the greatest quarterback after 3 Super Bowls. And it doesn't mean all it matters was the Super Bowls. It was, again, it's the ability to rise to the occasion in the biggest moments at the biggest time with the most pressure. And again, no one has done that better at this point in the history of the NFL than Tom Brady. Patrick Mahomes isn't that far off because, again, it's not all about championships, but there's no bigger stage than the Super Bowl. There's no bigger stage before that than the championship weekend. And so far, the 2 of those players pretty much own those 2 weekends in their time in the NFL. So that's where it's at. But again, if I sit there and say that, and then in the same breath say, well, Patrick Mahomes isn't even close to Tom Brady. Well, that's true. Both things are true. I'm not knocking Mahomes, but unless I
The way I compare
yeah.
this to, Ian, is you watch The Godfather, 2 hours and 50 minutes. It's, in my opinion, the greatest movie ever made. And then you watch Goodfellas, and 1 hour and 10 minutes into it, you go, you know what? This is the greatest movie ever made. You don't bother to watch the final
Right.
hour of it. You got to let this play out. You can't make these declarative statements when one guy is still chasing another guy and has played essentially 1/3 of the time that the greatest player has played. Let's let this play out.
Well, because like I said, and look, this is worst case scenario for Chiefs fans. He just has a solid rest of the career. He's Phillip Rivers the rest of his career, which is fine. Doesn't go to Super Bowl, doesn't win one, has some good stats. No one's talking about him even in the same breath as Tom Brady when it's all said and done. And that's kind of the point right now. So you can project and assume all you want. It's not a great argument, in my opinion. So anyways, I'm very, very over, but it's okay. It's a good show. It's a good talk. I still don't know where I come out on all this because, again, I started to kind of rail in on Patrick Mahomes, and then I think we gave him some pretty phenomenal compliments, but it's not always taken that way. So either way, anyways, thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back on Monday. Today's Friday. I was going to say Friday. We're not going to be back on Friday. We're already here, but we're going. Anyways, we'll be back on Monday. We'll talk some more NFL. We'll probably get into the NBA, NHL, all that fun stuff. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll talk to you then.